because ultimately we teach our kids regulation through how we regulate. And if we're stressed, then we're going to be modelling anxiety and we're going to be modelling poor coping. And not to ever to blame, but we just don't think of it as being so important to look after yourself and do fun and nice and calming things. But I think it's absolutely up there with any other thing you can do for your child is to look after your own mental health.
Hello, I'm Dr Jodi Richardson, and you're listening to Well, Hello Anxiety, a podcast where we end the struggle with anxiety and build our toolkit of practical skills to thrive. Hello, and welcome back to another episode. Thank you so much for joining us. I am joined today by the wonderful Chloe Porter, and we had the joy of meeting each other at the TEDx Sydney event a few weeks ago it was now, and we got to spend the day together and really get to know one another, and we really clicked, obviously because we have very similar interests in the world of mental health and particularly around anxiety. But Chloe is a clinical psychologist who specialises now in supporting clients or neurodiverse clients. She's had 10 years experience in juvenile justice system. She's now in private practice at the Centre for Neurodiversity in Sydney. She's also got a very personal interest in the work that she does because Chloe's beautiful daughter Poppy is diagnosed with autism. And so today's conversation is really going to centre around anxiety and autism. And so this will support those of you as adults who might be listening, also parents of children who are autistic as well. And the very first thing I want to do is to say a huge warm welcome to Chloe. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me. Excited to be here.
Oh, thank you so much. And we chatted a little bit, didn't we, before I pressed record about the appropriate way to talk about somebody who is an autistic person. And you had some really lovely insights that I'd really love for you to share with all of us, please.
Yeah, it's always a difficult one. I think in the past it was always a person with autism was the way clinicians would describe or talk about people who are autistic. But I think the autistic community, the majority potentially have said that they prefer just being called an autistic person. It's a part of their neurology and it's not a disorder as such. And so saying person with autism assumes a disorder. And so it's an individual choice, obviously, and different people will prefer different ways. But my understanding from my clients is that they prefer just to be called autistic or an autistic person.
Oh, thank you very much. And like you said before, that we can ask. If we're not sure, we can ask in a gentle and polite way if we're unsure.
Yeah, and take their lead. They'll often refer to themselves, in the way that they prefer to be referred to. So just take that lead as well.
Oh, brilliant. Thanks so much. It's really lovely to start in that place. So we're all learning, and I often like to say, I'm often learning just as much as our listeners are learning, depending on who it is that I'm talking with. And I know I'm going to learn a lot today. And in my research, I was looking up neurodiversity to share for those of you listening who don't have experience with anybody who's neurodiverse. And just wanted to share this definition that neurodiversity describes the idea that people experience and interact with the world around them in many different ways. There's no one right way of thinking, learning and behaving. And so without any further ado, Chloe, I'd love for you to share with us, please, how can anxiety present differently for autistic people?
I think it's important to sort of start with that, like the percentages of people with anxiety with autism are really, really high. Like clinical levels is, 40%, but most people with autism, sort of it's about 80% really experience like high levels of anxiety that are somewhat like impairing for them. And if we think about that, this is a neurological difference. And so the way that the world is processed is really, really different. And that's why there's a lot of anxiety. And so the areas that sort of are really problematic are sort of social. So it's a social communication, there's social communication deficits. And so there can be, problems understanding, interpreting facial expressions, interpreting tone of voice and what other people are kind of trying to communicate with their nonverbal and verbal behaviour. So it's really like confusing. It can be really confusing to know what other people sort of want from you, or what you're meant to be doing in a situation. And so my boss always describes, and I'm not sure who this came from or whether it's her or someone else, but that sort of typically developing people it's just a natural implicit kind of, that's their operating system, their computer operating system, is to understand social cues and social norms, and they really are invisible, a lot of the social rules. And so if you can't interpret those, or you're not aware of or implicitly know them, you have to kind of manually learn them. And so there's this cognitive effort in knowing exactly what this could mean in this context, and it might mean something different in a different context, and it changes with tone of voice and certain things. So there's this real, it's a lot of effort, and it's draining, and you often get it wrong, because the right thing to say in one situation might not be the right thing to say in another. And if you ever try to teach someone social skills, you, as a typically developing person, kind of go, well, that you just know that. and my autistic clients go, well, you don't just know that. I have a great client, and she was explaining to me with her partner, she's not getting on with the in-laws, and we were talking through what some of the issues are. And she said, they say to me, oh, the dishwasher's full. And so for a typically developing person, you might know that means unpack the dishwasher, please. For her, she goes, oh, is it? And I said to her, oh, I think they were telling you that, they'd like you to unpack the dishwasher. And she's like, well, why wouldn't they just say that? Because I'm happy to help. And I thought, yeah, it's so true. Well, I do typically develop being people, say it in a sort of really subtle way, in a non-direct way, and then get upset that you haven't read that. And so for her, it was a really good explanation for me, a simple one, to go, oh, okay, it would make heaps more sense if we just said exactly what we meant. And
Yes.
so, and you realise that she's got no intention of not being helpful or doing the right things, but she's been interpreted as being kind of a bit rude. And so that creates anxiety, because she's been misread and seen as sort of unhelpful or lazy or some other thing, but she's absolutely not. She's just, misread the cue. And it's very understandable why you would, because how does she know?
That's it. It's a simple statement of fact, and she's probably thinking, and
Yeah.
and and I love this example, because it's not only the fact that it's difficult to interpret that statement as a request,
Yep.
but then the facial expressions, the non-verbal cues that she'll be getting as a result of not having heard the request the way it was intended will be confusing, because she doesn't understand what she's done wrong.
And I think, there is sort of a perception sometimes that there's sort of a lack of empathy, and it's not a lack of empathy. Or, for her, she understands that she's upset people. She can't work out why. And so when she feels this and she can't exactly understand it, her go-to, which is anxiety driven, is a flight response. So she avoids dinners or leaves the table and goes into the room of the boyfriend. And then that's interpreted again as doesn't want to, hang out with us and doesn't like us and is seen as sort of rude. And yeah, so, for her, this sort of small example actually has quite, big repercussions. And her partner says, why don't you just unpack the dishwasher? And, and she's like, what? No one asked me to. And so it becomes this, thing. And fortunately for her, she's got a great partner who, she's wanting to learn and he wants to learn. And so, we talked about her clarifying and him helping interpret for her those social things. And, if he notices a funny reaction from her, to assume that she's misunderstood or not read it, and to kind of give her some guidance in, private or whatever. But, and that's really helped. We've given her a few strategies. When she walks in the door, she doesn't know how to kind of connect. So she would sort of pat the dog rather than say hello to the family. And again, that's interpreted. She prefers the dog over the people. And what it really is that the dog's feels safer for her, and she's going to the dog to seek comfort and regulate herself. And so part of the learning, and this is, for anyone working or in a relationship with someone who's autistic, is to find out about those things and understand, is have a bit of a different interpretation of behaviour than we might usually, and think, what else is going on? Could this be anxiety driven? Why is she patting the dog? Is it because she's rude, or could it be something else? And so, for her and I in our group, in our sessions, it was about having a bit of a script for her to walk in, explaining why it's important to greet, a few questions that she might ask that would go to, how's your day? What have you been up to? That sort of thing. And, recognising that her need is, she does need to kind of recoup after a day, because socialising is really, really draining. I use the sort of idea of the social battery is smaller and it gets drained a lot quicker. And so there's a lot more downtime required. And she goes to uni, and so by the end of the day, she's really just needing to be on her own. But, she has to sort of, I think, well, she doesn't have to, but it's good for her to come understand their sort of neurotypical needs, which is some sort of connection when someone walks into your house, and just for everyone to feel comfortable. So kind of meeting halfway. She's not going to sit there and have a big chat for an hour about her day, but she can do a little bit to ease their discomfort. And then she can also manage her own need for some time alone and to recharge herself with whatever she needs, and for them to recognise that that's not her being rude, that's her regulating.
Yes, and it's important, isn't it, for anybody who lives with or socializes with or connects with anybody who's autistic, is to develop their understanding, because then we can come at the experiences that we have together from a point of curiosity, can't we? Rather than from a point of jumping to conclusions and making assumptions that we could make about, if I said to my daughter the dishwasher's full, she'd know exactly what that meant, and so we can make assumptions that other people should. And so this point of view of curiosity, and also I think if we can make it comfortable for other people to share with us what they need.
Yeah.
Is that something that she feels comfortable talking to her in-laws about? And on a general level, how hard is it for somebody who's autistic to be able to ask for what they need and express the challenges that they face every day?
Look, I think it is hard. I think there's, a lot of stereotypes and misunderstandings. But I think that I like to always say, with anyone I work with, really, that assume the best in people, like people are doing the best they can. So both the neurotypical and the autistic people are doing the best they can. So if they have more information, then the parents would understand. And so we've looked at, giving them that information, and they've been really receptive to it and found it really helpful and asked for more. And now we have some things that they can say to her. Is this part of the autism? Can you explain it to me? And so that the parents know that they can ask. But it's different in terms of how people respond to that. I think, as an example, for me, it's a process when your child's diagnosed and you kind of have your own stereotypes. And even as a psychologist, I sort of had stereotypes about, what I thought it was. And I get a lot of people telling me that, oh, she doesn't seem autistic, and is she really? And she seems so high functioning, and all sorts of things. And so sometimes, and I think, oh, so I don't tell people. But then I realised, actually, I need to tell people, because otherwise her behaviour will be really misinterpreted, and that's unfair on her. And I have this sort of, some people who I work with, and even family members who, have autistic children, don't necessarily agree with how much I tell people about it. But for me, it's been a really positive thing to share, because I think otherwise, my daughter, so the way her anxiety can express is she can become very controlling, or she might, melt down really quickly. And, when she plays soccer particularly, she just doesn't cope well with things like losing, or the rules being changed, or being told she's going to be this position this week and a new position another week. So, and she can really overreact, but the way she might overreact doesn't look like anxiety. It looks like oppositional behaviour. So she'll be like, no, I'm not doing it. I refuse. That's not what you told me. And so, if I was looking at a child and I didn't know they had autism, I'd be thinking, wow, this child doesn't respect authority, and, she's been really rude to the coach, and this is unacceptable. And you might give them a consequence. And I also think, those people are perceiving like, what's going on with this child? She's acting like a bit of a spoiled brat.
Yeah.
And so for me, it's been really important to share with with people, her coach and my, friends, parents, that this actually represents anxiety and she needs to kind of know when changes are going to happen. And if they kind of come unprepared for that change, then she may react in this way. And it's really, it's about anxiety. She doesn't know what to do now. She didn't know she'd prepared herself in her mind for this position and she can't be, it's harder for her to be flexible. But if I had some warning, I can prepare her and I can manage it, and she can cope, but she does in the moment when it's a sudden thing, then she'll just spike and get triggered and then there'll be this overreaction. So I feel like it's really been benefit and really important for us. And I've had a lot of really positive support when I've been more open about it. And I think for my journey, I've gone from being so stressed out about it and, really catastrophizing myself that, like she's not going to be able to do sort of normal things. But that's not been the case. There just definitely are some accommodations that need to be made and some understandings. But she's, doing everything mainstream school and soccer and dance and every other thing. So, but yeah, I do need to let people know about it. So that those things that are going to come up are interpreted through that lens rather than, just being, a spoiled brat, for want of a better
Yes.
word.
Yes, and it's a lesson to all of us, isn't it? I saw a beautiful meme about a mum at the park on her phone, and it was just a reminder that, some people might look at a mum whose children are playing on the park equipment and she's on her phone as being somebody who's distracted or numbing out or just, online shopping. And the meme pointed out that we never know what kind of path other people are walking, and that this mum could have just lost a family member and could be organising a funeral or could be, trying to locate a lost dog, or it could be anything. And it's just such a reminder for us that when we come from a place of non-judgment and just recognizing, like you said earlier, everybody's doing the best that they can and not jumping to conclusions, because it just puts additional pressure on families who are already, managing difficulties and challenges day to day. So you sharing your experience, and I know you do so with Poppy's permission, it's really powerful because no doubt and for all of us, when we notice that something's not typical about our children,
Mm.
it's so natural, isn't it, to go to that worst case scenario and for all the stereotypes to start to play out in our minds, and that causes a lot of anxiety for parents as well, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I think that, I often with the parents I work with, it's, we look at situations which they've been triggered or overreacted to. And a lot of it is around their own, catastrophizing that their child is never going to be able to do something, or, so the example that often comes up for me is that, children who can't go to restaurants or, family gatherings. And so they say, they need to be able to sit at a restaurant and do this and, engage in the conversation. And if I don't make them do it, then they'll never be able to do it. And it's sort of, a lot of what I do is just decatastrophizing that. Like at this point in time, that's very overwhelming. It's a highly stressful environment often for someone, who's autistic, because massive sensory overload. Restaurants, there's lots of people talking. You're often out with a lot of people. There's conversation to keep up with. There might be family members that they're not completely comfortable with and they're not sure how, to behave, and they're just overwhelmed. And that might come out as just shutting down, or they might, be begging you for a device or something, or basically, just being a little bit oppositional so that they can avoid this situation. So if I play up, I might get out of here because I really hate it. And if we come down and give consequences and, tell them, then we'll often get more oppositional behaviour or further shutdown and shame around the fact that they can't just be normal or, do the normal things, and their siblings are, and comparisons to siblings who seem to be coping who are younger or whatever. And so the anxiety increases. And, so what I talk with parents about is like, let's assume that they are going to get there, but it's going to take them longer. And here are some things that we can do to help that process and stretch out their comfort zone. So it is doing restaurants that are maybe quieter, or having less people there, or taking some accommodations, letting them have an iPad, even though in your parenting ideas you might have thought that that's not something you want. That we need to understand that this person is going to get overwhelmed much easier, and so we need to kind of accommodate that rather than try to force them to kind of do what everyone else is doing. We say, you know what, like if she spends the first 10 minutes or waits to entree and then she needs, her iPad, then that's okay. And, maybe as over time, the expectation is she waits till dessert. And then, eventually, can have more people, but it's just a slower process to get those things happening, but they're not going to not happen, and we don't need to make them kind of force them into it.
Yes, it's very much about just taking small steps, isn't it? And what might take a certain amount of time with one autistic young person might take longer with another, because it's a spectrum, isn't it? And different young people or even different adults will take longer to adjust and to sort of, like you say, stretch out. I love how you say stretch out that comfort zone, so that something that was once very uncomfortable now falls within the boundary of the comfort zone. And that's when you can just stretch it that little bit further. And those accommodations are important, aren't they, as helpful stepping stones towards those bigger goals?
I think, for me, when I think about this podcast and the anxiety, definitely with the children, but a lot of it, it's also the parents' anxiety comes into it. Am I doing the right thing? I'm letting my child get away with having things or getting out of situations. And then that anxiety plays in, and I'm being judged because I'm allowing my child to do this or that. And so it's also, parents feeling, either judged or judging themselves that they're doing, the wrong thing. But it's learning to kind of, I suppose it's developing your own resilience. Like, other people don't understand and they may judge. And had I not had an autistic child, I might have judged as well. Some of the things I do, like letting her avoid or leave situations or have the screens or do things that I probably wouldn't ordinarily thought I would have done, but learning to kind of make those, understand that you do have to make those accommodations, and that that's okay, and that not everyone else is going to agree or understand it, but you're doing the right thing, and it's your child.
Yes.
And what they can cope with, and that's your job, is to learn about your child and what they need, and sort of educating others, or just letting go of those other people's judgments and saying they just don't understand, and that's okay. That doesn't mean I'm doing the wrong thing.
That's it. And it's a hard thing to do, isn't it? We are so wired to be mindful of what others think of us, aren't we? Because once upon a time, if we weren't thought of highly, we might have been excluded, and that could have at one time in history meant an inability to survive. And so it's all developing those thinking skills, like you say, as a parent, that I'm doing what I need to do for my family situation. This is what's important for us, with an awareness that other people might judge because they don't understand, but just having an acceptance that you're doing what you need to do, and that's what's most important in that moment. But I'm really pleased that you raised that, because it's a lesson for all of us who are other parents, who are always in the company of other parents.
Yeah.
And, we were just talking the other day in our family about screens and going out to restaurants, and our son takes a book. He's such a bookworm, so we actually have to ask him to put his book down sometimes when we're out to dinner, because that can be just as antisocial as having a phone, but a much better alternative, of course. But it's just a really lovely reminder for us all to know that you never know what other people are dealing with, and sometimes we all just need to do whatever we need to do to get through the day as well, irrespective of what's happening with our children.
And I think, it's important. I often, talk to parents about that as an adult, we have a lot more options and control. And so, if I don't want to go to dinner, or I don't feel like talking at dinner, or, certain things, I have often the ability to go no, and I can choose not to. Or if I've had a bad day and I just want to listen to music or go and watch Netflix, then I often am allowed to do that to help myself regulate. And we somehow, don't always listen or let children do that too. And we expect them to go into situations which if we were in their same sort of, if we were having that bad day or already dysregulated, as an adult, you'd be allowed to go, no, not today. I've had too much. I'm going to, not go to that party. But we go, no, we've said yes. You've been invited. You must go. And we make them go. And so I always say, like, you just, be willing to change the plan if needed. And learning your child's language, learning what their signs are that they are dysregulated. Look at what you've been up to recently. Like, has there been a lot of demands? Have you been socializing a lot? Is it okay? Is it understandable that they're not coping at the moment in a situation they usually would cope with? And so that we can either, say no to that situation or provide accommodations that we wouldn't usually, because they're exhausted, their social battery is empty, because we can do that as adults, and often they can't. We don't let them, because the social norm is, if you've said yes to an invitation, you turn up. Also, I think being flexible as a parent to go, hold on, I can actually, change my mind and tell people that we're not coming, and yes, they'll be disappointed, but actually that's the best thing we can do for us, rather than take my child into a situation and they have a meltdown, or they don't interact, they shut down and are considered rude, and then that's worse for everyone, right? So
Yeah, it absolutely is. And if there are already social challenges, they're only going to be amplified because of a scenario like that. And so, yes, it's that flexibility. I love that word, flexibility, when it comes to thinking and to choices, and and for us to remember that our children have needs that are very similar to our own. And like you say, they just don't always have that agency. And I sometimes get a little bit surprised sometimes if I'll say, oh, we're going out to dinner on Friday night, we're going out for dinner and we're seeing such and such. And I think as a kid, I was super excited to go out for dinner because it didn't happen very often. And sometimes the shoulders might slump and I just think, huh, you don't want to go out for dinner, whereas sometimes it's at the end of the week. It might just be about just chilling out. So it's a really important reminder. And other people understand if we're honest and open. Other people are really understanding, especially like you say, you share with your friends and family and the important people in your circle about Poppy's needs, and it's important as parents that we really meet our kids' needs, even if sometimes it might put other people out.
yeah, and look at, often it's embarrassing. Like, I have to, when we're doing something socially, I've had to start, as a family, we're probably, not the best family well suited to someone who is autistic, because we're very spontaneous, really social, bit chaotic. I always think it's a worst nightmare. And so we had to sort of, really change, I suppose, the way we lived in a way early on to settle things, because I realised that we would just invite people over spontaneously, or say people could stay, or someone else would come, and she wouldn't cope, and then people would come over and she'd go into a room and not say hello, and it was her little friend, and and then she'd feel bad, and she would feel awful afterwards. But at the time, this was overwhelming. It wasn't what she expected. She had managed herself to prepare for this one friend, and then two more come, and it was too much. And I think particularly prior to the diagnosis, I just was like, oh, you can't do that. That's not okay.
Yeah.
You really upset them. And then now it's that we just limit it a little bit, and we I'm not religious about this, but I try to. We used to do a family meeting on a Sunday and kind of prepare the week and talk about where which was it too much this week, or what she was worried about, what if we were having people over, what did she need to cope with that? And that really helps settle her. And once you kind of develop that trust, and that you're going to consult and be willing to listen, then she's actually more able now to cope with this bit of spontaneity. And I can always say, the current plan is this, but it might change, because I can't control other people, so they might bring someone, or they might invite another person. What could we do to help? I'll ask them to let me know if that's going to happen, so we can prepare for it. But sometimes it's unexpected. But if that happens, and you need time out, then tell me and we'll go for a walk, or we'll go and do this, or some sort of, plan B for if the unexpected happens.
Yes. And that's a toolkit, I imagine, of various choices and options. And you've already shared some of those tools, those ideas about maybe going for a walk, maybe taking a time out, maybe just limiting the time, maybe that she's involved in the plans that have changed. When it comes to parenting an autistic child with obviously anxiety, because we know that they almost go hand in hand and it
Yeah.
can be a really daily struggle. What are you using with Poppy, or what skills are you building in Poppy? And
I always talk about sort of proactive strategies and reactive sort of strategies. So proactive are all the things that we do to kind of keep them regulated, keep her feeling safe and calm. And so that's the basics for everyone. It's a sort of sleep, diet, exercise, doing pleasurable stuff, having, people who, connection with people that, you trust and feel good with. So having a lot of opportunity, really focusing on those areas so that generally the world is, really predictable, feeling good in the body. So those things that, I think are my sort of proactive strategies. We tend to have a pretty, good routine. Like there are, jobs and chores, and I use like a when then strategy. So when you've completed all that, then you can have your devices or your free time or whatever you need, and really be consistent around those things. So I reduce kind of demands, because it's kind of like, yes, you can have your iPad, when you've done all those things, and yes, of course you can have it. So there's trying to limit the noise. And then also just preparing, like I sort of said, with the calendars, the visual stuff. So what's coming up? What have we got on this week? Who's where? Like what to prepare? What do you need for that situation? What are some of the things that, might go wrong or that you might not cope with, and how we're going to manage? So a lot of going through it, and repeated going through it, like checking her understanding and options. So that's sort of like proactively what we do. In terms of the reactive, like I think we kind of got to understand the triggers. So I need to know in my head and list them, like what triggers her. And so, there's the really common ones, like a swimming carnival or a day at school that's a little bit different will always be an issue. That what I might see is she won't even talk about that thing. So I won't notice that I won't even in my head be like, oh, it's a swimming carnival initially, but I'll notice that there's reassurance seeking, or there might be some more oppositional behaviour, like, no, I'm not doing that. No, refusals to do stuff. There might just be like crying a lot or whatever. And that might, and I have to start to go, okay, again, curiosity, like, why is she, like, I can see that this is anxiety and it's not looking like anxiety because she's not telling me she's worried, but I can tell she's getting, really controlling and really, difficult. What might be causing this? And so really thinking about, okay, and then I'll be like, hey, noticing you're anxious. Is this about this or this about that? And finding out, and then really drilling down, what is it that you're worried about? Is it you're worried about what you're going to wear, how you're going to go, what the day is going to look like, and then how can I get the teacher on board? As a strategy, definitely is having those support people, being very aware, letting them know, having some ideas from them about how, we had the athletics carnival recently and she was really out of sorts. And so the teacher, like, can you check in? Can you, what things give her a role? Because often having some sort of, like, it's the unstructured, they don't know what to do. She didn't know what to do, so the teacher, give her a little role in the day so she knows what to do and a safe person to go to, or things like that. So like today we've got a paediatric appointment, and this morning she was, the Queen had died, and, and there was this
yes.
repeated questioning about it. And I think my husband was getting frustrated, like, why she keep talking about it? But, for me, I'm like, okay, this is anxiety because she doesn't know how she feels about it. She doesn't know how to make sense of it. And there was this on and on and on about the Queen and things. And so it's just talking about that. But then I realised, okay, is there more to it? It's not just about the Queen. Like, you're just really nervous about going and seeing the paediatrician because she hates going, because it reminds her that she's not normal, what she feels like, and that's what she says, like, why do I have to go and have these appointments and not be normal? And just really validating all that, but recognising that, it'd be easy to go, stop talking about the Queen, but actually, that's not really what the issue is here. It's the presentation of the anxiety, but really it's multiple things about, one that's about death and existential stuff, but then also herself and what it means that she has to do these appointments and have medication, and that's really upsetting. And so just really asking and validating and saying, yeah, I know it really sucks, and that you do have to do these different stuff. And and I suppose for her, we were in the car a bit later and, we're talking about it, and I was saying she's a beautiful singer and none of us can sing. And we're like, where does she get this singing ability from? And that's, a really common thing in autism. And so I was saying, you know how you just can do maths, and how you can just sing and none of us can. that's part of autism, your autism, and that's, because your brain just picks up on that and is really good at that. So, there is positives to it, but it's not to invalidate the feeling of, right then it does suck to have to go and be different and have these appointments and leave school early and take medications. It's not, and I'm not going to pretend it's not. I'm just like, I know, babe, but it's really tough.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so good. You've got such a beautiful relationship with her and an openness and honesty and that's something that you've built no doubt over time and I think it's really beautiful for other parents of autistic children to listen to and to know that this is hard. It's hard on them, but that beautiful empathy that you share with her helps her feel really seen and heard, doesn't it? And understood that, yeah, look, we can't necessarily control that we need to do this, but yeah, it doesn't mean that it's not easy.
And it is something that is not just, naturally. I think when before diagnosis, I really didn't understand her. I wasn't empathetic. I thought, I've got a little tyrant on my hands, and with all my psychology, I should be a better parent, and why is the rewards and consequences not working, and all these things that you're taught are the right parenting strategies. They aren't necessarily effective because you're not recognizing the underlying issue or the underlying need. So it's definitely been a process, and I'm still making millions of mistakes every other day. Like going, I could have
Yes.
predicted that. I could have planned for that. I think, you were asking how anxiety presents, and we've sort of touched on sensory, but, one of Poppy's things is, and friends have questioned me about this because they go, she's not, like, is she really sensory? And I was like, she is, but it's worse when she's tired or when she's upset. So I think that, a child can cope with a bit of loud she's, sensory with overwhelmed with sounds, but there's certain sounds that are worse. So crowded places, unpredictable sounds, those can be overwhelming, but they're not always. She can listen to loud music or loud things. She talks really loudly. She can, but it will depend on how she's feeling when she goes into that situation and what she can cope with. And often even excitability. So they can be really excited, but that's still putting you in kind of a hyper aroused state. And so it's much easier to like flick over into anxiety and overwhelm, even from an excited state. So she, will be like the Easter show. Oh, I'm so excited. And then we get there and it very quickly becomes overwhelming. And so then you have to leave and you've paid all this money and she's been excited. She's been wanting to go. And suddenly you're leaving after, an hour or two, because initially she could cope and as she stayed longer, it just overwhelming. And so preparing yourself in advance that, this is the plan, but it may start to overwhelm, but she's not putting it on. It gets worse over time if they're getting overwhelmed and they're dysregulated. So and it can look manipulative sometimes. It looks like they're just saying, I'm overwhelmed now because they want to go. And it's not just because they want to go and use their iPad. They actually probably are just the sensory stuff has just got too much for them and they need to leave.
Yes. And can you tell us more about the different types of sensory sensitivities with Poppy and with maybe some of the other patients that you've worked with?
Yeah, look, there tends to be in both. So there's a hyposensory difference. So that can be like they're under responsive to sensory things, or an over responsivity. So someone who might be under responsive to sort of movement needs to get more movement to feel stuff. So they might be constantly moving around and need, like, sitting still is really difficult for them. And that's in ADHD too. But so that can be, there's an understimulation and they need more stimulation. So they might seek out like flavors or smells or, chewing. So Poppy chews a lot of her clothes. A lot of my clients, their clothing and things, they just need this constant input. So that would be that they're undersensitive to those things. And then there's the over, so that often, definitely sounds, vacuum cleaners, hair dryers, shopping centres, things like that. Bright light, so often fluorescent lighting, it really kind of flickers and things like that. And they can get really obsessed by visual stuff, so that, there's some flickering thing over there and they're kind of looking over, or they need symmetry in what they see. So I have, like, in my office, there's like a cupboard that's kind of askew and a lot of my clients just can't cope with it and they want to fix it. And, that just feels wrong. And so that can be an issue. Taste. So taste can just be overwhelming and aversive. There's a preference for like sameness and bland things, or things not kind of combined. So a lot of clients like food that is just as it is rather than mixed into like a stew or something like that. So, or the
Yes.
textures can be overwhelming. So, and that can lead to those real restricted food preferences, which can make meal times really, really stressful. And I think once you understand that it's sensory and get an OT to do a look at their sensory profile, that can really help feel that it's not just refusing to eat things; it's actually overwhelming to them.
Yeah, that insight's really important, I think, because it just broadens that understanding, doesn't it? So that when you're faced with these challenges as a parent or as a partner, then you are better equipped to understand what's happening and to be able to react or respond accordingly in a supportive way.
Yeah, so I was giving, the example. So Poppy's had a few. So when she's tired, so they tend to get worse. So all of us, like if I'm exhausted at the end of the day and everyone's yelling, then my capacity to, be loud, and even if they're happy loud, I get overwhelmed by it. And I hate the chalkboard thing or people scratching things. And so that's mine, but it's minor and it has no impairment. And so I often think that kids will say with like shoes, it feels like walking on blades, like knife blades and things. And so you start to get an understanding of like, if that's what it felt like for me, of course I'm going to like throw off my shoes and do anything I can to avoid that feeling. Really understanding, getting the child's language around. What does it feel like to eat that or have that on you? Or they're really good at describing it. If can't think of all the examples, but I've got so many good examples of people explaining what it feels like. And so just really, really trying to understand that sensory profile and writing it down and informing others about it. I had to change Poppy's sheets, pajamas, everything and I didn't realise. And then you realise like part of her reason for not being comfortable in bed was, she didn't like the things just didn't feel right, but when she couldn't explain it in language. So I always think like assume, like when you're looking at what's going on for your child, I think there's the acronym HALT is one that I can't remember where that's from, but, hungry, angry, lonely, tired is kind of consider, are they hungry? Are they lonely? Are they tired? Has something happened that's upset them? But also with autism, adding, sensory. So is there some sensory overwhelm? And before you kind of address the behaviour, try and look at whether those things are put in place, because if they're hungry, then feeding them is going to, hopefully regulate them, as opposed to giving a consequence or a reward. So once you've kind of met those sort of physical needs, then you start to look at the other stuff as well. But often, it's a matter of giving them a drink or giving them something, and then it goes down, and then we can start to look at what else is going on. And if there is an issue at all, or if it was just one of those things to begin with, but wasn't expressed in that way.
Yes.
Because one of the things with autism is this difficulty with interoception. So understanding what's going on in my body. Am I hungry? Do I need to go to the toilet? Am I tired? And so they won't pick up on those cues. So they won't say I'm hungry. It'll just be like, no, I can't cope.
Yes, and that was something that I had two particular questions written down. One was about interoception, which you've just mentioned, which is that inability to identify those sensory signals from within, or the cues, like you
Yeah.
just explained. And the other was, I hope I pronounced this correctly, alexithymia.
Yeah, and that's the understanding your emotions, so the physiology of your emotions and what I'm feeling. And particularly, alexithymia is on a spectrum as well, but there's this real often a problem with the different intensity levels of emotion. So everything's experienced as all or nothing. So I'm anxious at a 10 out of 10 or I'm a 0, and there's not much in between. So what you see is this really overreaction to what seems minor to everyone else. But one, their system is already, overly taxed and stretched. And so they're more likely to get dysregulated. But two, they haven't identified it earlier, how anxious they're feeling. Like even just the example with Pops earlier that, she was getting anxious about this appointment and then the Queen and stuff. So it was me going, she wasn't identifying anxiety. I was just seeing anxiety. And so then I needed to say that to her. And really the treatment for that is people reflecting it, is teaching, is knowing, the parent knowing what those cues are, explaining, I think you're anxious because I'm noticing this and this and this, and what are you noticing, and giving that language. But it means as a parent you've got to kind of take a step back
Yes.
and notice and have
Yes.
the space to notice rather than because it does seem unreasonable and irrational and often really annoying. Like, why are you absolutely
Yes.
going off about this tiny thing? One of the trainings I did was about when a behaviour doesn't make sense, what else might be going on. So if it is disproportionate, you've got like there's some other need or something else going on, and start to kind of go, rather than jump on it and go, you're overreacting and that's not the problem and why is this such an issue? It's that, okay, what else is going on here? Because this does not make sense. I need to try to make sense rather than assume the worst, which is, my child's just been difficult for the sake
Yes.
of being difficult.
For the sake of being difficult, that's it, which is a huge frustration, and we'll respond in a very different way depending on our understanding of where it's coming from. And like you said, and this is probably a lovely place to start to finish up, is this idea that we as parents, especially parents of beautiful young people like Poppy, but even in general with parenting, it's easy to be reactive, isn't it? Because we've got so much going on and we're often managing our own stresses and challenges. And then when something happens, it's so important for us to look after ourselves, isn't it?
I think with parents that it's hard for them. That the idea is that once I've kind of managed my child, then I'll look after myself. And I find it really hard to get any of my parents to really look after themselves. And I 100%, went through a bit of a period of just focusing and reading a million things and speaking. And then I just went, you know what, I need to, I took time off work, which was something I could do, but not everyone can do that. But I had to really and I used to call it selfish, but I don't call it selfish and like it's smart. But, I have a book club, I do surfing, I try and do things that are for me. And yes, I should be reading this or doing that or whatever I think in my head. But you know what? I'm a much better parent when I'm enjoying my life as well. And I don't feel resentful and I feel more calm and able to cope because I'm like, it doesn't always feel like I'm in a battle. And so I'm, able to take that step back. So I actually think it's the best thing you can do as a parent. And is just as important as doing a course or taking kids to therapy. It's got to be up there. It's, as a priority. And I just recommend people really think that is, that is therapy too, is keeping yourself regulated, because ultimately we teach our kids regulation through how we regulate. And if we're stressed, then we're going to be modelling anxiety and we're going to be modelling poor coping. And, not to ever to blame, but we just don't think of it as being so important to look after yourself and do fun and nice and calming things. But I think it's absolutely like up there with any other thing you can do for your child is to look after your own mental health.
Thank you for saying that. I think it's such a gift to our children when we do look after ourselves. We should not be last on the list because they don't get the best of us when we don't take care of ourselves. So I really love that you've emphasised that. Chloe, thank you so much for sharing your expertise today and for sharing with us your personal journey, as well as so much of what you practice and have learned from your clients in the clinic. How can people connect with you?
Yeah, I work for the Centre for Neurodiversity. We're in Erina on the Central Coast, but we've got through the Facebook or the admin on there, and I'll do my best to get back to you.
Yeah, fantastic. And for parents listening who are looking for some more support in their local area, what do you recommend?
I always recommend just looking for local Facebook groups of, parents of autistic people, local autism groups, and really word of mouth. Otherwise, the GP and the paediatrician who tend to be the ones that get the feedback on individual clinicians who, experienced and doing good work and families are really relating to. I think that's the best way, honestly. Yeah, word of mouth.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you so much. And thank you for your time. It's just been such a pleasure to reconnect with you. And thank you again for sharing all of your expertise or a portion of it, I should say. There were so many more conversations that we could have had. So, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Jodi. Thanks for having me.
Oh, thank you. And thank you for tuning in with us today. Thank you so much. And if you know of somebody who would benefit from this conversation or any other on the podcast, please be sure to share it. Thanks again for joining us this week, and I'll see you next week. Bye. Thank you so much for joining me for this week's episode. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and leave a review. To keep the conversation going, I'd love you to join me over on Instagram. You'll find me at Dr Jodi Richardson. Also, if you'd like a copy of my free 5-day mini email course, Calm Your Anxious Brain, then jump over to my website, drjodirichardson.com, and you can sign up down the bottom. I've really enjoyed having your company. Thanks so much. See you next time.